Randy Potts, our final speaker, is a freelance writer, photographer, public speaker, and performance artist. He focuses on the intersection of religion, culture, and LGBT rights. In addition, he spent much of his career focused on young people, working with juvenile delinquents on the East Coast, as a social worker in Oklahoma City, and as a middle school English teacher.
Hello, and thank you, Leslie. It's a tough act to follow. That was an amazing, really amazing story. And thank you to the Dallas Way and to Bruce, is that better? Okay, for inviting me. I'm a little nervous. I've spoken a lot across the country, but tonight I was trying to think about what I could talk about that was specific to Dallas. I've lived here about 7 years, and it's something I haven't talked much about. I had a custody battle with my ex-wife over my 3 children, and I decided that would be a thing to talk about that a lot of people in Dallas don't have a lot of experience with. So I'll briefly just talk. I was born in Tulsa to a very religious family, you might say. My grandfather was a TV preacher named Oral Roberts, who a lot of the younger people don't know who that is anymore, and that's just fine with me. But he was quite prominent on television, especially up through the 70s and 80s. And I grew up on a religious compound in Tulsa. And you know, I went to a Christian school where if you got hurt on the playground, everybody reached their hands out and prayed in tongues over you. And so a very religious upbringing that I had. And I knew, just like Leslie said, I knew from the age of 5 or so that I was different. I didn't have words for it, but I knew when I was a kid it was the Dukes of Hazzard that I would watch. And you know, all the boys were looking at Daisy in her Daisy Duke shorts, and I was just looking at Bo and Luke, and like I couldn't decide which one was more beautiful. And I was just, both of them, they kind of blurred together in my mind as like the ideal man. And I knew at that age that, you know, I was supposed to be looking at Daisy, but there was Bo and there was Luke, and but I didn't have words for it. And as I grew up, you know, in middle school, I tried really hard to have crushes on girls, and I would ask girls to go out with me, and I would, you know, do those little things where you'd write your name and the girl's name and imagine being married and all this kind of thing. And I was a very romantic kid, so I kept imagining my future with a wife and children and pets and all that kind of thing. And then when I got to college, I met a girl who became my best friend, and pretty quickly it just made sense to me that we were best friends, and I should try to kiss her. And so I did, and 2 years later we got married. And I even told her at the time that I didn't have attractions to women, but I thought it was because I was so Christian. I thought because I'm so Christian, I don't sexualize women's bodies. I don't go around looking at their back sides or their front sides because I'm such a good person. And she actually accepted that. So, of course, I didn't like to admit to myself that, you know, in the shower stalls and stuff that I did look at the boys, but I didn't hardly tell myself that. So I was as honest with her as I was with myself. So. She and I, we lived in Europe for a while. We lived on the East Coast, and I really loved to do social work. I worked with juvenile delinquents for a while. At any rate, then we finally moved back to Oklahoma and had children. And it was shortly after having children that all hell basically started to break loose. And I was abused as a kid sexually, and I remembered once I had a son, I started to think about, you know, for some reason having my daughter didn't trigger that, but having my son triggered all these memories of what it was like when I was a little boy. And I started having these flashbacks of the man that sexually abused me. And when they first started, they went on for 3 days straight, and I literally, I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop. It was like a movie playing right in front of my eyes, the things that had happened that I had never forgotten, but I had never allowed myself to really think about. And so I told my wife at the time, you know, what I was going through, and it was way too much for her, so I went to see a therapist. And over a year of therapy, started to realize that there were two things going on with me. On the one hand, I was sexually abused as a kid, and on the other hand, the reason I had never really been honest with myself about my feelings for men was because I thought that they came from the abuse. I thought that being attacked by a man as a child made me, sexually attracted to men, and so therefore it was a horrible, disgusting thing. And so it took a lot of years to find a way to sort that out and to say, okay, I was abused. I also at age 5 was looking at Bo and Luke, and they're completely separate things because the abuse started later. It took a few years to finally accept that, but eventually I did, and I realized that it was, that I was just gay. And there was finally a day where I stood in the kitchen and said out loud to myself, I'm gay. And it was this amazing feeling of kind of finding my name, kind of like finding the name Leslie. I just knew who I was and knew who I'd always been. And then the reality that I was married to someone I loved and I had 3 children came crashing down. And what do you do when you're in that situation? There's not really a perfect way to get through that. But eventually, my wife and I decided to get divorced, and that's what I'm going to try to focus on tonight. Is when we got separated, it was rocky for a while. My ex-wife and I, when we were married, we always had gay friends and lesbian friends, but somehow me being gay was very different. And I realized that she had a lot of ideas about what gay men were like. And she would come over to my apartment and start ransacking through it, convinced that I was showing the kids pornography, that I was going to have, I think she said, random faggot sex parties or something like that. She had some term, random transient faggot parties was what it was. And she would say that that's what I was having in front of my children. Once we separated. And I think she really believed it. I don't think she was making this up, but she had these ideas. And I was a middle school English teacher and really pretty lame. I didn't do, when I had my kids, which was every other night at the time, we would cook dinner and we would color and we would go to the park and I'd read them a bedtime story and then they'd go to sleep. And that was my life. But to her, there was this other stuff. At any rate, we sort of patched things up a little bit, and we both moved down to Dallas. She wanted to do a fellowship here in medicine, and I felt guilty and wanted to move for her career. So we all moved down here, even though we were just getting our divorce finalized. And we shared a moving van, and her family actually helped us put everything in the truck and unloaded the truck at her apartment, and then at my house, which was behind the old Simon David on Inwood when I first moved down here. And so we kind of found a little peace for a few months, but it still was really hard for my ex-wife. She had originally agreed to 50-50 custody, and so I had the kids half the time, and she had the kids half the time. And a lot of that was because she was more focused on her medical career, and she had been in medical school and residency when we had the kids, and I was a teacher, so I was the one that stayed home with the kids all summers, and was the one that picked the kids up from school and cooked the meals and all that kind of thing. So when we got divorced, it felt natural for me to at least have 50-50 custody. Well, about 6 months after we moved to Dallas, my ex-wife met a military man who openly hated faggots, unfortunately. And that's when things started to get really testy. And at a parent-teacher conference, afterwards, she told me that she was going to take the kids, marry this man and take the kids to Colleyville and provide a wholesome environment for the children, and that I could see them every other weekend if I wanted to. Now, the fact was we had 50-50 custody on paper in our divorce decree, but I didn't really know, as a gay man in Texas, how much that would hold. So I called her closest friends, I called her family, and none of them would really take sides, and everybody was too nervous. And so I finally went to see a lawyer, and first of all, I was terrified to see a lawyer. I'd never really, I realize now I'd never stood up to my wife. I married a very ballsy woman. And I was very happy to be the kid caretaker and the person who cooked and all that kind of thing. So I'd never really stood up to her. So going to a lawyer was pretty terrifying. And I found this lawyer that I Googled, and he was this maybe 70-year-old, rangy, kind of Texas go-get-'em type of guy. And I told him my story, and he stood up and he started to pace the room. And he had his hands in his pockets, and he was just like... And then he said, "Son, do you want to keep these children?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, now you understand, you're a single gay man in Texas, and you have this a straight doctor, female, who wants the children, and you want to keep your children." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Son, we're going to have to go in guns a-blazing." And he told me that we were going to have to go to court the next day. He said, "Now, if she's already living with this man, then she's violating the divorce decree, and we're going to have to go into the house and right in front of the children, just shame her and take the kids out of this house and go guns a-blazing." And he kept going on and just pacing and saying this stuff, and I was looking at him just absolutely horrified, imagining my kids, in this corner crying, and the guns, literally, and this wild Texas man, and a judge, and I had all these things going through my head, and I thought, that's not anything that I want to be involved with. So I stood up and I shook his hand, and I said, I don't think I can really go through that. And so I just went home and cried for a week, thinking, okay, I guess maybe I'm just going to lose my children. But finally, my best friend at the time, she had a lawyer that had helped her through her divorce, and so she took me to see her. And even though she was a very sweet, wonderful woman, she pretty much gave me the same advice. She said that as a single gay man in Texas, who had an ex-wife who was, a doctor and straight and about to be remarried, that I had an uphill battle, even though I already had 50-50 custody on the books. And so she said I would have to go on offense and, enforce the divorce decree, which would mean that we would get a restraining order against her man that she was living with, and there would be a social worker involved. And I again had all these, as the person that had sort of always thought about, how my kids were going to experience things. I was just absolutely terrified of my kids are very, very, very shy, and to think that, some random person would be asking them questions about mommy's house and daddy's house, and was a big leap to get past. But I finally decided that they needed to be with their father as much as their mother, and so I didn't have any money, and the lawyer needed a $10,000 retainer. And I was working at an energy company in the day and moonlighting in a restaurant at night, and the only button-down shirt I had was my waiter black shirt. And but when I told my brother, he sent $10,000, and he didn't have much money either, but he sent the money that weekend, and we got a retainer and went to court. And it was a really rough summer. Every time I had interactions with my ex-wife, she would scream and call me a faggot in front of the children. Got to where I would only meet her somewhere like a grocery store where there was actually a security guard because she wouldn't yell. It wasn't that I was physically afraid, but it was the only way I could think of that would keep her from verbally assaulting me when the kids were around. And during the summer, the man she had just married, took things one step further. While we were in court, he sat my 3 children down, who were ages 8, 6, and 4, and said, "Kids, I'm going to show you what being gay is like, what your dad is like." And he turned on an episode of South Park that I love South Park, but I hope I never see this episode. It's one where there's a gay teacher and there's a gerbil introduced into someone's anus, and he showed the kids this episode to show them what their dad was. And my kids came to me the next day and they were like, "Daddy, we saw this weird cartoon and it was really weird, and there was a guy who, he took his pants down and did all these weird things." And so I Googled and figured out it was an episode of South Park. And they said Mommy just stood by and said we had to watch it, and that this was, a learning experience for us. So through the summer, I was terrified that I was going to lose my children, and I was my ex-wife told the social worker, well, he goes to gay bars and, you know, he sleeps around, all this stuff. And her family said the same thing. And I just was convinced that I was going to lose my kids. But fortunately, in Dallas County, I don't know if people, I don't think this is very well known, but in Dallas County, there are 11 family law judges, and they're pretty friendly towards gay people. They don't really see it as a thing of if they're gay, they should lose the kids. And so you're pretty safe in Dallas County, and we both lived in Dallas County, so that was very fortunate. And the social worker actually went to both houses and everything, and her final recommendation was that the kids should actually live with me and then see mom every other weekend because there was lots of drama, like the South Park thing at mom's house. So that really floored me, and I was amazed by that, but there's still more to the story. We got that recommendation from the social worker, and I'd only met the social worker a couple of times, and I didn't really think much about her appearance, but I guess my ex-wife did because she had her lawyer Google her and found out that she was lesbian. And furthermore, she found out that there was an article about her in the Dallas Voice. She had been mugged at knife point somewhere down here on the Strip, and she'd actually fought off her attacker. And when she was interviewed by The Voice, she was quoted as saying, "I am woman, hear me roar." And so with that little newspaper clipping, my wife went to the judge and said that the social worker was not just a lesbian, she was a militant lesbian. Militant meaning she fought off her attacker, who tried to knife her. But she was a militant lesbian, and so therefore the judge actually, instead of, they almost always act on the social worker's recommendation, he refused to make any determination based on that because she was a militant lesbian. And basically said we would have to go to either a full jury trial or mediation. And I was terrified of full jury trial, first of all, because it can be thousands of dollars a day, but secondly, because I didn't know in Texas with the jury, as a single gay man, with 3 small children, I didn't know how it would turn out. But things serendipitously turned out all right. We had an 11-hour mediation. It started at like 9 in the morning. It was in August at 5 p.m. The building's air conditioning shut off, so we literally were like sweating, and the mediator were going back and forth from room to room. But 11 hours later, we got back to square one, which was 50-50 custody, which was exactly what really I wanted, but we had to go through all that just to maintain that right, and about $50,000 that I'm still paying off. But at any rate, I wanted to tell that story to kind of illustrate a little bit about what it's like to be a gay father in Texas, and especially a gay father who has an ex-spouse that isn't necessarily friendly. And the good thing is that in the counties like Dallas County or in urban places like Austin or Houston, it's actually, we have pretty equal rights, and you can be pretty assured that you're going to get a fair hearing in court. But outside of those areas, it still can be, it really depends on the judge. You still have judges who will assume that that a gay man can't parent children, and will take that into consideration. So we still have a lot of work to do. But in my case, I was very fortunate to live in Dallas County, and I had a really good support network of people helping me through it. And my kids are wonderful. They're now teenagers. My oldest is 14, and my son is 13, and my youngest daughter is 11. And more and more, they don't want a whole lot to do with me because they're teenagers. But my husband and I, we lived together, and we got married 2 years ago, and we live up in the suburbs, up near the airport, where they go to school in Coppell, my kids do. And things are good. I maintain my rights to custody, and I think it is doable. And so I thought I'd just share that tonight, and thank you all very much.